The silence at the table was heavy enough to choke on. A moment ago there was laughter, loud performative laughter from my sister. But now the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the erratic ticking of the hallway clock. I looked across the roast beef at Caleb, my sister's brand new fiancé, an army ranger who had walked in here an hour ago looking like he owned the place. But he wasn't looking at Maya anymore. He was staring at my chest. Specifically, at the small oxidized silver pin on my lapel. His face had drained of color, the blood rushing out so fast he looked like he might pass out right into the mashed potatoes. Maya, my sister, a marketing executive who treated every family gathering like a press release, was still frozen with that smug, triumphant grin on her face. She had absolutely no idea what she had just done. It was almost funny, in a dark, twisted way. She had brought a war hero home to finally put me in my place, to show everyone what a real man looked like compared to her boring, paper-pushing sister. She thought she was bringing in the heavy artillery to level my self-esteem. Instead, she had unwittingly introduced a Tier 1 operator to her handler. She didn't know that the man sitting across from her, the man she was using as a prop to belittle me, was currently terrified of the woman she was mocking. To understand how we got to this suffocating standoff, though, you have to understand how the night started, and really, how my entire life in this family has gone. 2 hours earlier, the mood was electric, buzzing with the kind of adoration I hadn't seen directed my way since I was a toddler. My mother, Carol, a woman who equates volume with affection, was practically vibrating as she poured Caleb another drink. My father, a man who thinks a firm handshake is the only true measure of a soul, was hanging on Caleb's every word about basic training. I was just the furniture, necessary to fill the empty chair but functionally invisible. Then there was Maya. She wasn't just proud, she was predatory. She kept glancing at me, waiting for an opening to strike, desperate to leverage Caleb's status to highlight my supposed mediocrity. It happened over the appetizers. Caleb's unit is deploying again soon, Maya announced, her voice dripping with a dramatic concern that felt entirely rehearsed. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing with that familiar, sharp glint. It must be nice, Alex, knowing you'll never have to deal with that kind of risk. I mean, the worst thing that happens in your little office is, what? A paper cut? A server crash? I took a slow sip of water, letting the insult land without flinching. She didn't stop there. It's just frustrating, she sighed, turning back to Caleb to solicit his agreement. Alex misses every Christmas, every birthday, claiming she's busy with work. We all know she's just filing paperwork in a basement somewhere, but she acts like it's top secret. Meanwhile, you're actually out there saving lives? I didn't say anything. I couldn't tell them that the Christmas I missed was spent in a shipping container, in a hostile region, monitoring an extraction that went sideways. I couldn't tell them that the paperwork I was filing was actually the kill capture order for a cell that had threatened the eastern seaboard. And I certainly couldn't explain the pin. I almost never wore it. It was a memento mori, a quiet memorial for an asset I lost 5 years ago today. It wasn't jewelry, it was a tombstone for a friend I couldn't publicly mourn. Maya saw a prop for her narrative, but I carried the weight of ghosts she couldn't even imagine. Maya thought she was twisting the knife, showing me what a real man looked like. She didn't realize that in the world of shadows where Caleb and I operated, the man holding the gun isn't always the one calling the shots. Maya lived her life on a billboard, or at least that's how it felt to me. Every promotion at her marketing firm was accompanied by a long-winded social media post about hustle, culture, and a celebratory dinner where my parents would beam like she'd just invented electricity. She measured her worth in metrics everyone could see: impressions, click-through rates, and the raw salary figures she loved to accidentally leave on the kitchen counter for our parents to find. To them, this was success. It was loud, it was tangible, and it came with a corner office they could visit and brag about to their friends at the country club. They looked at her and saw the future of the family name, bright, shiny, and undeniable. Then there was me. In their eyes, I was the cautionary tale, the daughter who settled for the safety of government bureaucracy because she lacked the drive to compete in the real world. They thought I worked in logistics, or maybe human resources, some gray, undefined role within the department. of defense where my biggest responsibility was ordering toner cartridges or filing travel vouchers. "It's good steady work," my father would say with a pitying pat on the back. The kind of tone you use for a child who just struck out at t-ball. "Not everyone is cut out for the high stakes, daughter. Someone has to keep the lights on." If they only knew that keeping the lights on wasn't my job. My job was deciding whose lights went out permanently. I wasn't filing travel vouchers. I was a senior targeting officer for the DIA. My days weren't measured in spreadsheets, but in SIGINT intercepts and pattern of life. Analysis that determined if a target was a viable threat or a civilian non-combatant. While Maya was stressing over the font choice for a holiday ad campaign, I was scrubbing geospatial ratification data to ensure a Hellfire missile hit a specific window frame and not the schoolhouse next door. The stakes in my office weren't quarterly earnings, they were the kill-capture lists that shaped American foreign policy. I remember a specific night about 6 months ago. The same night, actually, that Maya won a Marketer of the Year award. While my family was toasting her with champagne, I was sitting in a skiff. A windowless, soundproof box kept at a constant 65 degrees to protect the servers. The air smelled of ozone and stale coffee, the only light coming from the bank of monitors washing my face in a pale blue glow. We were tracking a high-value target in the Idlib province, a ghost we'd been hunting for 3 years. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to suffocate a civilian, broken only by the hum of the cooling fans and the clipped voices of the operators on the ground. The field commander, a lieutenant colonel with more ambition than patience, was pushing for a breach. "We have the thermal signature," he barked over the comms, his voice distorted by the encryption. "Team 1 is stacking up. Initiating breach in 30 seconds. My eyes scanned the feeds, the grainy thermal overlay, the drone loiter, footage, the intercept transcripts scrolling on my secondary monitor. Something wasn't right. The pattern of life analysis showed a deviation. A heat signature in the adjacent structure that hadn't moved in 4 hours. That wasn't a guard. Guards shift their weight, they smoke, they patrol. That was a hostage. Or a child. "Abort," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the absolute, terrifying calm of someone who holds the cards. The colonel exploded on the line. "Who is this? I have a go order. We are breaching." My hand hovered over the master override key, the alpha protocol switch that cuts local command authority. "This is Overwatch Actual," I replied, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. "I am overriding your authority under Article 9. You have unrecognized heat signatures consistent with non-combatants in the breach zone. Stand down immediately, or I will revoke your operational clearance before you can kick that door." There was a pause, 3 seconds that felt like a lifetime, before I heard the heavy sigh of the colonel stepping back. "Standing down," he gritted out. 10 minutes later, updated intel confirmed the building was rigged with a dead man's switch connected to the door. If they had breached, 12 operators, 12 fathers, sons, and husbands, would have been vaporized. I didn't get a medal for that. I didn't get a celebratory dinner or a LinkedIn post. I just logged the incident report, rubbed my tired eyes, and drove home to an empty apartment, listening to a voicemail from my mother asking why I couldn't make more of an effort to attend Maya's award ceremony. The irony was so sharp it drew blood. My family mocked me for being risk-averse, for being the one who checked the expiration dates on milk and drove exactly the speed limit. "You're so timid, Alex," Maya would laugh. Usually, while recounting some reckless thing she did on a corporate retreat, they saw my caution as fear. They didn't understand that when you spend your life holding the power of life and death in your hands, you learn that recklessness isn't bravery, it's a liability. I wasn't timid because I was afraid of the world. I was careful because I knew exactly how fragile it really was. So, sitting there at the dinner table, listening to them fawn over Caleb's bravery, I felt that familiar distance opening up again. I watched Maya tease me, watched my father shake his head at my safe little life, and I cataloged it all. I added their insults to the internal ledger I'd been keeping since I was 16. Every dismissed achievement, every condescending smile, every assumption that I was somehow less. They looked at me and saw a void where a woman should be. But I knew the truth. They mistook my silence for weakness. They didn't know that in my line of work, silence is the only thing that keeps you alive. But Caleb? Caleb knew the sound of that silence. Back at the table, the air had shifted, at least for two of us. While my mother went on about the floral arrangements for the engagement party, Caleb wasn't listening. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth, his eyes darting from that oxidized silver pin to my face, then back to the pin. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a dawning, terrifying recognition. He knew that symbol. In the circles he ran in, that dagger and globe insignia didn't belong to office clerks. It belonged to Ghost Cell, the shadow unit that provided direct intelligence. Support to rangers and Delta operators in the darkest corners of the map. I saw the gears turning in his head, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his future brother-in-law. He needed to be sure. He needed to know if I was just a poser who bought military surplus online, or if I was actually read on. He cleared his throat, interrupting my father's monologue about his golf handicap. "The soup is excellent, Mrs. Mercer," Caleb said, his voice tight, eyes locked on mine. "Reminds me of a stew I had once overseas, though the weather in the Korengal was always unpredictable this time of year." It sounded like small talk to my parents, but it was a shibboleth, a verbal challenge. The Korengal Valley hadn't been an active theater for conventional forces in that specific season for years. He was referencing a specific classified window of operations. I didn't blink. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him sweat. "It's only unpredictable if you're on the ground," I said, my tone casual, boring even. "From 30,000 feet it's clear, provided you have the thermal override on the drone feed to cut through the cloud cover." Caleb went rigid. I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped his napkin. That wasn't public knowledge. The thermal override protocols were specific to the close air support assets my team managed. I had just confirmed his suspicion. I wasn't just watching the news, I was the one writing the news he lived through. Maya didn't like the silence that followed. She didn't like that Caleb was looking at me with something that looked suspiciously like respect or fear. To her, attention was a zero-sum game. If I had it, she was losing it. I watched her expression harden, the same look she used to give when we were kids, and I actually got an A on a report card, the look that said I was stepping out of line. She couldn't stand the deviation from the script. She needed me to be the failure so she could be the star. She reached out, placing a manicured hand on Caleb's arm, physically pulling his attention back to her. "Babe, you're being so serious." She laughed, though the sound was brittle and sharp. "Don't bore Alex with weather talk. She gets enough of that listening to the traffic report on her commute." She turned to the table, her eyes glinting with malice. "Tell us a real story, Caleb. Tell us about that time in Syria, you know, the ambush. I want Alex to hear what real pressure sounds like." She looked at me with a triumphant sneer, thinking she was about to expose my inadequacy. Maya wanted a story. She wanted a spectacle. She had no idea she was demanding a debriefing from the very operation that nearly got her fiancé killed. Maya just couldn't leave well enough alone. The silence I had orchestrated with the drone comment had unsettled her, and she needed to regain control the only way she knew how, by belittling me into submission. She let out a laugh that sounded more like breaking glass than joy, leaning across the table with a reckless, wine-fueled confidence. Her eyes dropped to the lapel of my jacket again, but this time she didn't just look. She reached out, her manicured fingernail flicking the matte black metal of the pin with a dismissive tink. "And what is this little trinket anyway?" She sneered, looking around the table for approval that wasn't coming. "Did you get Employee of the Month for the best spreadsheet, or did you buy it at a surplus store to play dress-up like Caleb?" The reaction was instantaneous and violent in its speed. Caleb's hand shot out, intercepting her wrist mid-air with a grip that was disciplined but firm. "Don't touch that." His voice wasn't a shout, but it was projected with a command voice resonance that hit the room like a physical blow. The dining room froze. My mother dropped her fork. The clatter against the china sounded like a gunshot. Maya tried to pull her hand back, her face twisting in confusion and sudden offense, but Caleb didn't let go immediately. He stared at her hand, touching that pin, as if she were trying to defuse a live munition with a hammer. Caleb stood up slowly, releasing her wrist and pushing his chair back. He wasn't looking at her anymore, he was looking at me, and for the first time in my life someone at this table was looking at me with absolute deference. "That is not a trinket, Maya," he said, his voice low and trembling with a suppressed intensity. That is the Sentinel's dagger. Do you have any idea what that means? There are maybe 12 people in the entire sector who are authorized to wear that. 12. And those 12 people are the only reason my platoon came home from Syria instead of coming home in draped boxes. Maya opened her mouth to speak, to make a joke, to deflect the heavy reality, settling over the room, but Caleb cut her off with a sharp gesture. He turned to face her fully, his expression hard. "You think I'm the hero because I hold the rifle?" he asked, pointing a finger at his own chest before leveling at me. "You have it backwards, I'm just the instrument. The woman wearing that pin is the one who points it. She has higher clearance than my general. If she is wearing that pin openly, it means she has seen things and authorized things that would break you in half." I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I watched my father's face. This was a man who worshipped rank, who had spent my entire life explaining to me why I wasn't tough enough for the military. Now he was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, the color draining from his cheeks, as he realized he had spent 30 years belittling a woman who gave orders to his heroes. The internal ledger I kept, the tally of every data entry joke, every soft comment, every dismissal, suddenly balanced itself in a single moment of terrified realization. Caleb turned to me. He straightened his back, snapping his heels together instinctively. A breach of dinner etiquette but a requirement of protocol. The room was dead silent as he offered me a subtle, sharp nod, the civilian equivalent of a salute. "Ma'am," he said, the word hanging in the air like smoke. "I didn't know it was you on the comms during Operation Black Fog, the pattern analysis you provided on the extraction route. You saved 6 of my guys. Thank you." Maya slumped back in her chair, small and silent, the golden child suddenly tarnished and irrelevant. She looked from Caleb to me, trying to reconcile the sister she bullied with the woman her fiancé was treating like a commanding officer. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it evaporated. The silence that followed wasn't the awkward silence of a bad joke. It was the heavy, reverent silence of a room that suddenly realized there was a predator at the table, and it wasn't the soldier. The remainder of the dinner was a blur of clinking silverware and suffocating awkwardness, the kind of tension that makes the air feel thick enough to chew. Maya pushed her food around her plate, her face a mask of petulant fury, furious that her attempt to humiliate me had backfired so spectacularly. My parents, on the other hand, looked like they were sitting with a stranger. My mother, who usually filled every silence with gossip or critiques of my appearance, kept glancing at me with a mixture of confusion and fear. My father, a man who had spent 30 years telling me I lacked the grit for the real world, couldn't even look me in the eye. Eventually, the curiosity overpowered the discomfort. "So Alex," my father started, his voice cracking slightly, stripped of its usual bluster. This job of yours. You're not in logistics? You're, what, like a spy?" I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, placing it gently on the table. I thought about the years of dismissal, the times he interrupted my stories to ask if I'd fixed the printer yet, the lifetime of being treated like a background character in my own family. I could have explained it. I could have told them about the clearance levels, the travel, the lives I'd impacted. But I realized I didn't want their validation anymore, not now that I knew how cheap it was. "I can't discuss it," I said simply. It was the same phrase I'd used for years, but this time I didn't say it like an apology. I said it like a door slamming shut. The mystique wasn't an inconvenience anymore, it was my armor, and they had lost the clearance to see behind it. The evening ended shortly after. Maya stormed out to the car the second dessert was declined, desperate to escape the scene of her defeat. But Caleb lingered. He found me on the front porch, where I was watching the streetlights flicker on, the cool evening air washing away the stifling heat of the dining room. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, leaning against the railing, respecting the silence in a way only another operator can. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and offered me one. I declined with a shake of my head, but I appreciated the gesture. It wasn't a peace offering, it was an acknowledgement of rank. "I'm sorry about her," Caleb said finally, exhaling a plume of smoke into the darkness. She has no idea. She thinks the world is just what she sees on Instagram." He looked at me, his expression pained. "I had no idea either, ma'am. If I had known who you were, If I'd known you were the voice on the other end of that comms channel, I never would have let her talk to you like that. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the fatigue behind his eyes. He wasn't just my sister's fiancé anymore, he was a man who had been in the dirt, a man I had guided home. "It's fine, Caleb," I said, and I meant it. Civilians. They need the world to be simple. They need to believe the fight is far away. It's better if they don't understand the cost. We stood there for a moment longer, two people from the same shadow world, bound by a truth the rest of the family would never comprehend. The next few weeks were a lesson in boundaries. Maya tried to pull me back into the fold, sending me tasks for the engagement party as if the dinner had never happened, trying to re-establish the old hierarchy where I was her assistant. I shut it down immediately. "I'm not doing this, Maya," I told her over the phone when she demanded I pick up the custom napkins. "I'm happy for you, really. But I won't be your punching bag anymore. I won't be the prop you use to make yourself feel tall." She tried to argue, tried to use her usual guilt trips, but the venom was gone. She knew that Caleb knew. She knew that every time she looked at her fiancé, she would be reminded that her boring sister outranked him. "And frankly," I added, my voice calm and final, now that Caleb knows exactly what. I don't think he's going to let you treat me like a subordinate, ever again." 6 months later, the world had moved on, and so had I. I was promoted to division chief, moving into an office that didn't have windows but had a direct line to the White House. I was buried in reports, managing teams across 3 continents, when the mail arrived at my secure Dropbox. On top of the stack was a heavy cream-colored envelope. It was the wedding invitation. It was addressed formally to Miss Alex Mercer, but when I opened it, a small handwritten note fell out onto my desk. It was from Caleb. It didn't have the flowery language my sister would have insisted on. It just said to the voice in the dark, "We saved you a seat at the head table. Respect." I looked at that note for a long time. For years, I had chased a legacy I thought I had to inherit from my parents, a legacy of loud approval and public praise. I realized now that I had been building my own legacy all along, in the quiet, in the dark, in the moments where no one was watching but the people who mattered. I didn't need my father to understand my job to know it was important. I didn't need Maya to respect me to know I was powerful. I had the respect of the men and women who stood on the line, and that was enough. My sister wanted a hero for a husband. She got one. But she learned the hard way that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Real power whispers. If you've ever had to hide your strength to keep the peace, tell your story in the comments.